It's time for another episode of Gospel Preaching Live, brought to you by the Kearney Church of Christ, which meets at 406 North Clark in Kearney, Missouri. Make plans to come out and visit the brethren, who look forward to seeing you. And now the host of Gospel Preaching Live, Richard Dodson.
Welcome to Gospel Preaching Live. I am Richard Dodson, minister of the Kearney Church of Christ. Every Thursday evening at this time, 7 p.m., and Sunday evenings at 6 p.m., I try, Lord willing, to come online and bring a message from God's Word, and I pray that you find it to be beneficial. If this is something that you appreciate, give us a like and share it with others. Help me to take the gospel to the people who are looking for it. That's my request of you. And if you may have any questions of me regarding anything that I teach on this show, you can call or text me at 816-686-9517, 816-686-9517, and I am in the Central Time Zone. Or if you choose, you can email me at gospelpreachinglive@gmail.com, gospelpreachinglive@gmail.com. And also, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you can always just leave comments in the comment section. But either way, let me know, and I'll do what I can to be able to assist you. Now, tonight, I want to talk about something that I believe is very important this day and age in the Lord's church. Now, if you look at this character on the screen, his name's Strother Martin. He's an actor, and this is from a scene. This line, "You're going to get your mind right," is a line from Cool Hand Luke. Now, there's scenes in Cool Hand Luke. I saw it when I was a younger man. I enjoyed it as a younger man, but now I remember there's a few scenes in there that, as a mature Christian, I would advise you to skip through quickly. And those are the ones I remember. But what I really remember about the movie, and without those scenes, it would have just been a fantastic movie in and of itself. Strother Martin was a very good actor. He was the captain in a prison, and he made this comment, a famous one you probably, have heard about. What we have here is a failure to communicate. I use that line many times with my children, but with Luke, he always made that comment, you're going to get your mind right. He had a prisoner, and the name escapes me, Paul Newman. I don't know how I can forget Paul Newman, but he played the character Luke. He was in prison, and he was always trying to escape. And then finally they were putting leg chains on him, and Strother Martin, his character is the captain. He lets him know that you're going to get your mind right. Now, why do I say that? Why do I lead up with that? It wasn't long ago, I was talking to a gospel preacher, and he was telling me about problems where he was at, and he just summed it all up. He said, the problem is these people are not spiritually minded. And of course, I'm not there. I can't judge, but based on what he was saying, I understood where he was talking about. There are Christians who are not spiritually minded. They're still carnally minded. And that's the two mindsets, spiritual and carnal, as we're going to get into. Now, in order for us to be successful in our endeavor of serving Jesus, we got to get our mind right. We can't be carnally minded and go to heaven. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You're going to have to be spiritually minded, which is by far better anyway. But needless to say, this lesson is designed, first of all, to warn you about that bad mindset, but to show us and show anyone who's interested how they can become spiritually minded. And I would hope that everyone would choose to do that. Now, I want to give an example of what I'm talking about having the wrong type of mind. Jesus, and I'm going to blow this up so everyone can see it a little bit better. Jesus was talking to his disciples in Matthew chapter 16 and verses 21 through 23. And let me read this for you. It says, "From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Now we know that was the will of God. That was prophesied. That's what he was sent to do. And Peter took him aside as we continue in our reading and began to rebuke him, Jesus, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you." But he, being Jesus, turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." Now think about that. This would apply to any Christian who is carnally minded. You're not helping Jesus. You're hindering the work. He wants you to set your mind on the things of God, not on the things of man. And this is a really great passage to jumpstart this lesson and to illustrate this. Now, in First Corinthians, if you have looked at the book of First Corinthians, you know in chapter 3, for instance, that Paul told the Corinthians that he wanted to speak to them about spiritual things, but they weren't ready, because he said they were carnally minded. They could not receive the things of the Spirit. And so he leads into that in chapter 2 by reading, and I'm going to read verse 13 and 14, but I want you to notice Paul's words to those in Corinth who, they were having problem being carnally minded because there was division among themselves. Each one was and they were dividing up into sects, following different men. And it says, Paul said, "We impart this in words not taught by human wisdoms," and he's talking about his teachings, "but taught by the Spirit." The Apostle Paul was inspired, interpreting spiritual truths to those who are spiritual. The natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him, and he is not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned. And so Paul makes a very revealing statement. You're not going to understand the deeper teachings of Christ if you are carnally minded. That's exactly what he's trying to get across. Unless Peter had changed the way he thought, he never would have grown the way he did. And the Corinthians were going to have to change the way they thought if they wanted to be able to comprehend Paul's deeper message. Now, in Romans 8, Paul said this to the Romans. It's really the same message. Starting in verse 5, he says, "For they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh, but they that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. So then they that are in the flesh cannot please God." Now, go back to what Jesus told Peter. He says, "You're minding the things of man. You, sir, are a hindrance to me." This is exactly what Paul spoke to the Romans about. The carnal mind is enmity against God. Now, we have a passage that we're going to use tonight in this lesson to show us what we need to do to become spiritually minded. And I think you'll enjoy this in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 24 through 26. And we'll read this, and then we'll pick up on the points right after that. He says, Jesus told his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever would save his life will lose it, and whosoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what shall it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul?" In this passage of scripture, and this is a really telling passage, Jesus is telling man what they need to do to become a spiritually minded person. Notice what he said. If anyone would come after me, what does that illustrate? That's showing desire. If someone wants to follow Jesus, okay, that's what Jesus is getting at in that passage. If anyone, and that's everybody in the world. I mean, Jesus doesn't care. If anyone has that type of desire, now he's got conditions. You just can't follow Jesus by how you determine to do it. I guess you can, but that doesn't mean Jesus is going to be with you. Jesus is going to let you know the terms. He says, let him deny himself. Now that's commitment. And that's point number 2. You're going to have to be committed to Jesus. And we're going to talk about all 4 of these. And then he goes on and says, and take up his cross. Well, that's acceptance. You've accepted what Jesus is requiring of you, and Jesus is accepting you as well, because you desire to come after him. You are denying yourself. You're showing your commitment, and now you're willing to take up your cross. So you've accepted the terms of Jesus, and he's accepting you. And then he says, follow me. And that means obedience. Those are the 4 keys right there to becoming spiritually minded. Have a desire to follow Jesus, be committed, have acceptance of his terms, and then obey his will. And those are the things we're going to talk about tonight. Now, to jumpstart that, I want to talk about the story of the rich young ruler and Jesus, because this is the perfect illustration of the points I'm trying to get across. The rich young ruler missed the point. He was one who wanted to be carnally minded, but yet follow Jesus. And that's just impossible. You can't do that. Now, let's go ahead and look at Matthew chapter 19 and verse 16 through 22. And behold, a man came up to him, which was Jesus, saying, Teacher, what good deed must I do to have eternal life? And he said to him, Why do you ask me what is good? There is only one who is good. If you would enter life, keep the commandments. And he said to him, Which ones? And Jesus said, You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, honor your father and mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And the young man said to him, All these things I have kept. What do I still lack? And Jesus said to him, If you would be perfect, go sell what you possess and give to the poor, and you shall have treasure in heaven. Come and follow me. And when the young man heard this, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. You see, he was not willing to be spiritually minded. He wanted to hang on to those possessions, which means he wanted to be carnally minded. He wanted to mind some of the things of this world. Now, notice what Jesus said. Now, remember, we're using this story to illustrate the point. He says, if you would be perfect, that means you want to follow me. You want to be like me. Do you want to be perfect? Is that what you want? That would be desire. Okay. And it sounds like that's what the young man wanted. And then he says, go and sell what you possess and give to the poor. Now, why would he tell him to do that? Commitment. Jesus knew what was in his heart, and he knew there was something that he could not give up. He knew all things. And so he says, go and sell what you possess and give to the poor. You have to be 100% committed to Jesus. And this shows that. And he goes on and says, come, which would be acceptance. Once you have done this, come. You've accepted my terms. I'm accepting you. And then he says, follow me, which is obedience. Those are the 4 points. Unfortunately, it didn't work for this young man. He had a form of righteousness, but it was his own form. It was not the type of righteousness that we seek to be if we want to be spiritually minded. So for the rest of this evening, I want to build on this. I want to talk about those 4 points and hopefully drive this home with anyone who's listening, that if you seek to be spiritually minded, you need to do these things. All right, the first one, if you look at this picture, this is the Apostle Saul, I guess, before at this occasion, but when he was on the road to Damascus and Jesus appeared in a bright light, he was blinded. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because we do see in him a desire to serve God. And that's based on James 4 and verse 8. You know, the Lord wants people to want to be like him. He says, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Again, when there's conditions to how you draw near to God. He's God, you're not. So you're going to have to come on his terms. He's not going to come to you on your terms. But if you do these things, then this is available to all men. You draw near to God, he's going to draw near to you. Now, I want you to notice what Paul said before the council in Acts chapter 23 and verse 1. He makes a very telling point about his spiritual life, which goes back before Jesus appeared to him on that road to Damascus. He says, brothers, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day. So you see, Paul, and he said this by inspiration, Paul had always had a desire to follow after God, be pleasing to him. Always had that desire. He was just wrong. That's why he was persecuting Christians. He was wrong. But the desire was there, and the Lord was getting ready to make that correction in his life. He had that desire. In Acts 22 and verse 10, Apostle Paul, when Jesus appeared to him on that road to Damascus, he makes this statement. He says, what shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said to him, rise and go into Damascus, and there you will be told what is appointed for you to do. And of course, that was Ananias that met him. The Lord sent him there. But notice what he says, what shall I do, Lord? In other words, I want to be pleasing to you. That's what I want. I want to be pleasing to you. And I'm sure there's people out there listening today who want to be pleasing to God. That's not something you should be ashamed of. That's a very, very good thing. You should want to be pleasing to God because you need God. I need God. We all need God. And so the desire to follow after Jesus, that is not a bad thing. Now let's talk about commitment. Like I said, a lot of people have a desire to follow after a form of Jesus, but they don't follow Jesus. Let's talk about commitment. That was the second thing. Cortez, and I don't know this story very well, and I may be mistelling it, but when Cortez got to the New World, he was a Spanish explorer. The story is, and I think I've heard it's not really true. It was just something that was built up upon, but who knows? I'll tell you the story anyway. He had his boats burned once they got to shore, and all his troops that were with him were just, I can't believe you did that. And Cortez said, I burned those ships so we keep going forward. He goes, I've just removed your exit. Now we have to go forward. In other words, he made them commit to this journey. And that's the story. You can look it up on your own, but I think you get the gist of it. Needless to say, it applies to the Christian. In Luke chapter 14 and verse 26 through 33, I got this separated into 3 slides, and so I'll just read it. And it describes exactly what Jesus expects from someone who wants to come and follow him. He says, if anyone, this is Jesus speaking, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even in his own life, he cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not bear his own cross and come in after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, going out to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, and this is what we need to understand, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Jesus has to come first. He has to be your first love. He has to come first. He has to come before your money. He has to come before your family. your parents, your brothers, sisters, your wife, your children. Jesus has to come first. That's not always easy for everyone to accept. But notice what he said. If any one of you, he didn't say some of you, he said anybody, any one of you that doesn't do this, you cannot be his disciple. And he wasn't saying you have to like renounce your family if at once. What he meant was that Jesus comes first. Before then, a carnal man may be thinking, well, my wife and kids come first in my life. And what is it? The military, I think, country, core, God, and family, or something. I can't remember the order, but you know what I'm saying. It doesn't really matter what the order is, and I'm not trying to offend any veteran out there by having the wrong order. I'm just trying to point out that any order that a man may set or any organization sets where God's not first is wrong, because God has to come first. He has to be priority number one. Now, let's talk about acceptance. You want to follow Jesus and you understand that he's got to come first. You've accepted that. You've like, all right, unlike the rich young ruler, I'm willing to go and sell all I have and give to the poor. Now, Jesus is not asking you to do that, but if he did, you'd say yes. That did happen in Acts chapter 4. In the first century church, the Christians there, they had people who at the end of Acts chapter 4, they were selling all that they had and coming houses and land and laying it at the proceeds at the apostles' feet so that nobody was having any need. They needed that at that point to help everyone be able to learn and get the church started. That was needed at that time. But if the need ever happened again, we're not going to let our brother suffer while we feast. We're going to raise our brother up if need be. And so acceptance is something that we have to do. We have to accept God's terms as he accepts us. And that's something that means we have to pick up our cross, whatever it may be, and bear our burden, and realizing that the Lord's will for me may be different than the Lord's will for someone else. It's just whatever the Lord decides. That he's God, I'm not. I'm here to serve him. That's my option right there. Whatever your will may be, so be it. Jesus made that same prayer in the garden when he wanted that cup removed from him. He prayed for that 3 times, but he said, let not my will be done, but thy will. I mean, he emphasized that. We live for God. We live for Christ. That's what we live for. And that's what we seek out to do. And so in Acts chapter 9, when we're talking about acceptance, let's go back to what Ananias was told by God. Ananias was afraid to go visit the Apostle Paul after Jesus appeared to him on the road to Damascus. And the reason being was that Saul, at that point, his reputation. And, but the Lord said a very telling statement. He said, you go, for he is this is Acts 9:15-16. Go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name before the Gentiles and kings of the children of Israel. For I will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name. So you see, the Apostle Paul, the Lord had a different will for him than he did for other people. Okay, now that's what we have to understand. The Lord has a different plan for each and every one of us, how he's going to use us. Now in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 23-28, we read about this plan that the Lord had for the Apostle Paul. I mean, he made it very clear to Ananias, he's going to suffer great things. Well, let's read about some of these. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 23-28, Paul said this in defending his apostleship, but we won't go into that part of it. He says, are they servants of Christ? In verse 23, I'm better when I am talking like a madman with far greater labors. He's answering an argument that's not pertinent to our conversation. But this is where it starts. Far more imprisonments with countless beatings and often near death. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea. Oh, that's always been my biggest fear, was being out in the ocean at night and having jaws swim up on me. On frequent journeys, and danger from rivers, dangers from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from the Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers, and toil and hardship, through many a sleepless nights, and hunger and thirst, often without food, and cold and exposure, and apart from other things, there's the daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all the churches. Yeah, he had a lot of things that he had to suffer, that he had to endure. And that was the will of God. That was his cross. Now, what did he have to give up? Well, just like that rich young ruler, there was a lot that Paul gave up to suffer like that. He gave up a lot to suffer like that. Philippians 3:4-7, Paul says, if anyone thinks he has reason for confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church, as to righteousness under the law, blameless. But whatever gain I had, I counted it as loss for the sake of Christ. He'd had an education. He learned at the foot of Gamaliel, which was a very good education. He was a Pharisee, and he excelled. And the Jews loved him. I mean, he was revered. He had much to gain by remaining faithful to the Jewish belief. But as he says, he counted it as loss for Jesus. He gave all that up to suffer, as we've seen. And that illustrates his acceptance of the terms of the Lord. He came to Jesus. He came to him, and the Lord accepted him. Now let's talk about our last point, and that's obedience. Obedience is very important. James 4:7-8 says, submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw nigh to God and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. Purify your hearts, ye double-minded. Double-minded, what does that mean? That means you're torn between the carnal and you're torn between the spiritual. And he's saying, look, no, you're not going to do that. Can't be double-minded. Submit to God is what he's trying to get at. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 11-12, it's a good passage where Paul is trying to exhort those in Corinth to give as a purpose. And he says, now therefore perform the doing of it, that as there was a readiness to will, there may be a performance. In other words, it's not enough just to be ready. You have to obey. You have to follow through. You have to finish. My son's a basketball player. And, you can put on all kinds of moves and drive to the basket, but if you don't finish, then, what good is it? Ball goes off the rim, the other team gets a rebound, and they go down and score. Well, you have to perform. You can be ready, but you have to perform. You have to do what you're ready for. And he says, if there first be a willing mind, it is accepted according to that a man hath, and not according that he hath not. And then 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 7, each one, when he talks about giving, must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And we know from 1 Corinthians 16, the Lord commands us to lay by and store on the first day of the week. And he wants us to obey, but he wants us to obey from the heart. And that applies not just to our giving, but to all obedience. He wants us to do this cheerfully. He wants us to be a cheerful servant of his. And so those are the things that we have to do if we're going to get our mind right and be spiritually minded. We're going to have that desire, as we showed, to follow Jesus. We're going to have commitment, willing to put Jesus first, and that takes commitment. And then we're going to have to accept those terms. We counted the cost, and we're willing to pay that price. And then we obey. And if we do those things, we will have our mind right. We will have set our mind to spiritual things, and we will not be a hindrance to Jesus, but we will be a useful tool in his service. I hope this lesson's been beneficial to you. If you're ever in the Kearney, Missouri area, please come and visit with us. We meet at 406 North Clark, Sunday mornings at 9:30 for Bible study, 10:30 for worship. And you can learn all about the church by going to kearneychurch.com. If you like this lesson and you'd like to hear more, tune in to KPGZ 102.7 FM every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. And you'll hear a lesson just like this one as I preach on the radio. And if you cannot receive the signal because you live outside of Kearney, don't worry, you can stream it on your mobile device. Berean Spirits is an internet show that I'm part of every Thursday morning at 10 a.m. Me and a few preachers get together and we try to study God's word as the Bereans did in Acts 17. And we invite others to join by leaving comments in the comments section. If you would like to take part in that, go to kearneychurch.com and press on the Facebook, YouTube, or Berean Spirits app, and it will take you to it. And if you can't see it live and take part, don't worry, they're still up there. You can watch a recording of the show. All right, that's all I have for you this evening. I hope you found it beneficial. This Sunday evening, Lord willing, at 6 p.m., I will try to come to you again. Until then, remember, this is the day the Lord has made. Let's rejoice in it and be glad.
This has been Gospel Preaching Live. Join us each week as truth is taught, faith is examined, and beliefs are challenged. Be sure and hit the like button so you can be notified of future episodes. And to watch past episodes, go to our website, kearneychurch.com. This has been a work of the Kearney Church of Christ.